Hi folks, welcome to my video on the college Quizbowl tiers for the 2019 to 2020 season. I thought I'd do something a bit different than normal. Typically, I know that this is done via a poll, and you rank teams in order as to how you think they're the best. And I wanted to take a different approach. This one's inspired by something I've seen in the Age of Empires 2 community. First of many shoutouts on this video, shout out to Hera and Viper, the two leading players in the Age of Empires 2 community who gave me this idea for doing a tiered ranking system with this amazing tier maker website. Shout out to Tier Maker for making this website that makes this so easy. Shout out to Harry White for having his amazing statistics base that I'm able to search for while searching for this video. And shout out to Kitaro, who's providing the background music for today's video as well. Maybe turning it down a little bit to make it easier to hear you talk. Alright, sounds good. Sorry, this is a bit of an experiment. So yeah, what I wanted to do with this video is, speaking as the head of one of the leading competitive teams in the country, I wanted to give you all some thoughts. I know that people have a lot of time during this COVID epidemic, and people are thirsting to hear more discussion about the college scene, even though it's not really happening right now. And while I don't have as much data as I'd like to go on, I think it's still plenty enough to give some thoughts as to who's most competitive right now, who's really interested in talking about, and highlight some players I really wanted to give a shout out to for amazing performances this season. But I wanted to cover things on a team level as well and show that I think there's a different approach we can go about when discussing rankings and who's the best. So I'm going to proceed in order. No particular order. I'm going to proceed in tier order. So I've listed down here a bunch of teams who I think are top bracket contenders at serious top bracket contenders at ACF Nationals, and who I would not be surprised to see in the top bracket. And for those of them that are playing ICT, I think I would not be surprised to see any of these teams in the ICT top bracket as well. In addition to probably a couple of folks that I'm missing because there's so much variance in ICT. But these are the teams I wanted to talk about and who I felt fairly comfortable talking about. And so that's what we're going to go with. So first off, we're going to start at the S tier. So first up here, I would put Chicago A. I think this is fairly unsurprising. Chicago A has been, fantastic team. They've got, there's really not a whole lot to say about them. They have extremely good coverage in every single subject. I think unfortunately, have not had a chance to play against them, so I don't really know what their weaknesses are. If I had to guess, I would think, this team is obviously incredible at arts, very good at literature, very good at history, thanks to triple-pronged attack on history, from Adam and Jacob providing generalist support, and Matt leading the charge. Literature similar, with John leading, and Matt and Jacob providing support. Arts, absurdly dominant. Philosophy, social science, everything above. I think that if there's anywhere that Chicago has a weakness, it's in NAQT categories in science, but they're not bad at those by any means either. Simply, Jacob is a pretty good geography player. Matt can pick up some of that from history. They're decently informed folks. They can pick up some current events. So, yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot to say. I think if there's any place they're not among the three best teams in the country at, it would be in the science distribution, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. But that's not to discount them either, and Adam and Jacob deserve a lot of credit for their science knowledge as well. So the other team I'm going to put in the S tier is my own team, and shocker, these are the only two teams in the S tier, but yeah, Columbia A. So, speaking a bit about us, I find it a bit difficult to assess my own strengths, but I'd say, this is gonna come as no surprise. I think myself, Itamar, and Jacob Reed are the best three players in the country, and of all of those, I would say, it's difficult. I think I scale as specialist across. It's interesting. I'm sort of in an intermediate position between Itamar and Jacob there. Because Itamar is an extremely good generalist, and I think he scales most on generalism across all levels. And Jacob Reed, I think, is the most specialized out of all of us, and I sit somewhere in the middle. because I have a lot of really deep specialties, and I have enough Quizbowl coverage in general to be a decent journalist as well. But I have the fortune of being accompanied by Raphael, Harrison, and Noah. Raphael, he's a fairly known quantity. He's become this year he's become a bit more specialized than he was last year, simply because he has a lot more well-rounded support on categories. He's still an amazing arts and physical sciences player with a lot of math knowledge as well. Who's able to pick up a ton of buzzes on stuff he knows all across the rest of the distribution, particularly in older literature, European history, and philosophy, and also mythology, where he's shadowed massively by myself. He was shadowed by Ben before, but he's able to get a lot there as well. And is also a very good current events player. I'd say another good current events player on our team is Harrison. He's also a very good literature player. He specializes most in Anglophone, particularly drama, and has developed incredible coverage as a player there and grown a lot. He's also a superb film player and a solid generalist across a lot of the humanities. He can pick up assorted buzzes in social science and history on a couple ticks per tournament regularly. And of course, Noah. Noah's a really deep biology player, and so it's hard to say. It's hard to really. No, it's hard to really describe how much we appreciate and we all appreciate having Noah on our team, because we all suck at bio and Noah knows a lot about it. But he's also just an incredible extra scientist as well. He gets shadowed incredibly hard by Raphael, and before Raphael came back, he was shadowed a lot by Gerhardt. But he manages to get buzzes in chemistry and physics and other sciences quite regularly, and despite a lot of competition there. And I'm able to pick up some things around the edges as well. But he's just such a solid addition. He consistently puts up a bunch of powers, gets really good buzzes in areas, and sort of rounds us out really well. That's probably a bit too much dishing on us. It's the team I'm most qualified to dish on, though. I think everyone sort of pits us and Chicago as the main teams to look at going into Nats to be the winners. And I think if you had to put us vis-a-vis Chicago, I think it's hard to say. I would slightly favor Chicago on ACF distributions, and I would slightly favor us on ICT distribution, simply because I think we are a stronger. I think we are a stronger team overall on geography and current events, and I think we're a bit more well-rounded on trash because of Harrison. And there's a little less arts, and it's not that we're a bad arts team. I think we're a very good arts team, but it's undeniable that Chicago's a better arts team, and there's a little less art per packet at NAQT. There's a little less philosophy. Some of the areas I think we are weaker than Chicago on, for sure. So on the ACF distribution, I'd say they're better than us at arts and philosophy, and we're better than them at science, but again, there's so much packet dependence here that it's really hard to assess this. So yeah, those are our S tier teams. We're gonna move down to the A tier next. So if the S tier is the teams that are likely to be champions, I would say A tier is teams that have an outside shot, and who I think have a reasonable shot at making a finals run. And there's going to be, I think, some surprises here, and some less surprising teams. I'm going to start with the less controversial takes. So, first among these is Maryland. So, Maryland is interesting. I've been able to play against them 3 times. I've played 4 games against them this year. The first 2 were at Penn Bowl, when we didn't have a full team, because Raphael hadn't really fully come back. We won one narrow victory, and then we won a fairly decisive finals victory. Maryland is interesting. So they have Caleb, Graham, Jack, and Vishwa, and all of these players are quite strong. I think Jack and Vishwa have really grown into their roles more as specialist players on this team. I think they were struggling a lot at higher difficulty things last year. But if you look at if we look for Maryland this year, I think you can clearly see that they've started to really, really, really scale a bit more. And yeah, so for example, if you look at and this is workshop, you can see Vishwa has really, really stepped up his game a lot and covering more on some tougher regular tournaments like that. If you look at Fall Open here, similar story. Jack and Vishwa are putting up like really consistent numbers at a similar contribution of Legram. Caleb remains their best player in terms of generalism. He's fantastic at literature, philosophy, and history, and can pick up other things, and social science. He can pick up other things as well. So Maryland's really, really well-rounded. Insofar as they have a weakness, I'd say it's probably in the arts, and they're not bad at this by any means. Graham and Vishwa are solid at visual. Jack is working, and Caleb can pick up some auditory. I think the real thing is with Maryland is that they just don't have the same level of punching power. They're good across all of these categories, and in particular, I think science. I think they really hold their own against other top teams. I'd say we're probably a bit better, but that's I gotta emphasize a bit because sometimes you just don't know how science is gonna play out. But it's just that I can't think of any categories where like Maryland is really better than us or Chicago at a high level, except maybe they're better than us at philosophy or something. It's just that hit across history, literature, science, religion, and mythology are weaknesses for this team. I just don't see the same level coming out of them. That's not to say they're not very good. They're extremely well run. I think that means they're guaranteed to have, unless they really, really screw up, they're guaranteed to punch highly, and they can easily climb into the finals. It's just that I think they're just definitively a level below the teams above them. Another one here is Illinois, another unsurprising one here. Illinois, I'd say similarly. Illinois, I think, has the advantage of having, I talked about Itamar, myself, and Jacob Reed as probably like the top three. I mean, Aroni would clearly be number 4 in that ranking. And so Illinois benefits, from having Aroni as a super generalist and a really, really good player on literature, biology, and chemistry. Very solid generalist coverage of like everything in the distribution, except perhaps for the physical sciences. And they have a lot of great support around Aroni. It's sort of a very classic college team model. And Aroni's support, I'd say, is a fair bit better than it was when he was at UCSD. So he's in a position where he's still engaged with the community. He's still very, very high level generalist. He's had some trouble. He's had some time to adjust to his PhD program, and so I'm not sure he's quite at the level that he was when he was playing on Michigan in 2016. But he's still doing very well, and his teammates consistently add around 40 ppg. And because of this, Illinois, I think, can beat anybody on an off packet pretty easily. I think they have, because they're so reliant on one player, I think they have a bit more upward fluctuation possibility, but also downward fluctuation possibility. So Aroni's fairly solid, but they could be a bit more likely to take losses, but they could also be a bit more likely to really punch upward. And I could certainly see us losing to them on a bad packet. I could certainly see Chicago losing to them on a bad packet. It hasn't happened. Illinois didn't come close to beating Chicago in any of their confrontations. I think we have a bit more tendency to make mistakes, so perhaps a bit more likely to beat us. But regardless, I think still it's a similar situation as Maryland. I can't see any categories where they're really decisively better. Which brings me to our next team, Berkeley. Again, Berkeley is a fairly established, very established competitor, very well-rounded team. I'd say Rahul is their best player, but everyone on that team is contributing a bunch. This team has there's a lot of things I think about this team that people don't entirely appreciate about it. Rahul is a pretty well-known quantity in terms of his lit and arts ability and some other humanities generalism. And but the other players, I think, and Coates is pretty well known as a solid history and modern world and geography player. But I think there's the other parts of this team aren't quite as well known. Rohin is a chemistry major, I believe, very solid all around science player. Has fairly comprehensive coverage of the category at like a regular level. I don't know if this necessarily consistently translates up to the Nats level, but he's still quite very good. James has really accelerated in terms of his ability as both a visual arts player and as a history player. So Berkeley is like definitely underappreciated as a history team because Rohin's also quite a solid player on history, especially world history. So they have a lot of people buzzing there. He's got a very good lit player. They're very good at visual arts. They have a lot of other science coverage because of what people on this team study, and so they're decent at science overall. They have a lot more. They definitely have more category holes. Similar to Maryland, there's a bit of a hole in religion and mythology. I would have to guess there's not really a hole in any QT categories, but I would have to guess. Rahul's great, but I'm not sure. No man is an island, and it's hard for somebody who doesn't have a massive level of knowledge to really fully covering literature at the level you need to go up against the Chicago or a Columbia. So again, I think, and stats will bear me out here. I think this team's about at the level of Illinois and Maryland, and I think has, perhaps slightly worse on MACF, but makes up for it with a solid Coates boost on NAQT. So I think this team definitely deserves to be in the A tier. Our next A tier team is Florida. Now, Florida might be a bit surprising to you all. Florida is certainly they're a bit of an up-and-comer. They did quite well at both of the Nationals last year, but they didn't really have a super high placement. But everybody on this team has been steadily improving. I know Taylor insists that he's kind of peaked, but he continues to write so much, and he reads a lot of things, and is quite prolific. So I doubt he's at peaks right yet. He's got a lot going for him, and whenever Nationals ends up happening, God willing, sometime in the late summer or fall, or perhaps even next year, Taylor will be a force to reckon with. He's put up double-digit power numbers on some recent opens. He's just all around great as a team leader. Jonathan Settle, similarly prolific science writer. It's been massively improving this year, putting up great results. Tracy Merkin has hugely improved at a lot of his areas of music, visual arts, and history, particularly world history. I've seen him get some ridiculous world. He's one of the few players I truly fear on the world history distribution. And Alex, I don't know much about what Alex knows, but he seems to consistently add buzzes to this team at a high level. And overall, they have again. I think they share a weakness with many other teams I've talked about here, potentially in the religion and mythology distribution. And, again, they're so reliant on Taylor for literature that's not, you can get a lot of good buzzes, but I just don't know if you can consistently deliver, more than 2 a game, except on quite good packets against the S tier teams. But on the other hand, this team is very solid. They have a lot of upside potential because they have a lot of really deep pockets in their knowledge base. And I would not be surprised to lose to this team. I wouldn't be that surprised. I would be somewhat surprised, but not that shocked. Same thing with Chicago, even, honestly. And they can beat anybody, I think. But again, still solid A tier team. I wouldn't put them any higher than that. Next up, we have Harvard. So Harvard's a weird one. They have not played their full A team together yet, except possibly at EFT. And I think that was the closest they had to an A team. But let's find Harvard. Jason Golfinos. Yeah, this is the closest they had to having a full A team play together, and Obviously EFT is a fairly easy tournament, but you sort of see that, it's what you predict. They have a lot of coverage across a lot of the distribution. Jason is obviously a very good generalist across humanities. He has ridiculous pockets in drama, Islamic and Asian and African history, um, things related to the law, a lot of philosophy topics. I would say he's the best active social science player as well. And so this team is one of the few that I think does have areas that it's better than Chicago or Columbia had. I think Jason's command of social science is incredible. He's great, and he gets some areas of history much better than us at as well, and religion. And the team overall, I mean, Michael Yue is a fantastic music player. Kelvin is a great chemistry player who can also get related buzzes in bio and physics. I'm not sure who their other A-team player would be because they still haven't really played one, but going by the EFT team, I think perhaps Thomas Joya, who he still has a bit of a neg problem, but he adds real buzzes on literature, and I think between all of that, and from last year, he showed that he was able to scale to some degree at ACF Nationals. So I think this is a team that has some real potential if they actually choose to play together. And not quite necessarily as well-rounded across the whole distribution, but Jason is sort of an Aroni-like player. He's so good that he can make up for a lot of that on his own. So those are our 5 A-tier teams. And this is fairly arbitrary, but I'm going to move to the B tier. And these are teams that I think are very unlikely to be in a final, but I think which have upset potential against any of the teams listed above them. Certainly, I would not be surprised to see any of these teams beat an A-tier team. And there's a low but real probability that they could knock out hit an S-tier team out. Very, very unlikely, I'd say, but not impossible. And I'd certainly, I think the archetypical example of these is Chicago B. I think, again, the reason I say unlikely but not impossible, I mean, well, we lost to Chicago B at Terrapin Open, and, that was an awful game. We played awfully that game, and I still feel bad about it, but it still illustrates that these teams, like, they really do, the field is really, really deep this year, and Chicago B is exactly one of those teams that's really deep. They're 4 really balanced players that cover a ton of the distribution. I think Tim Morrison here particularly deserves some highlighting as somebody who has put in a ton of work to get a lot better at literature and have more science coverage as well. Ben has improved tremendously at history. Alston has a lot of experience that he brings and is able to anchor this team, and Grant has really adapted to the college game impressively. And they continue a proud Chicago B tradition of, not being a team you ever really want to face off against, because, I don't know, you never know when they're just all going to collectively have, positive fluctuation in the same direction and just swamp you with a bunch of great buzzes, especially if you're on an off game. So next in this B tier, I'm gonna put OSU. Again, these aren't in these aren't in any order or anything. They're just tiers. So I think all these teams are fairly comparable in each tier. So OSU, Chris Ray, Clark Smith, and an alternating cast of additional players. This team, I think, is easily an A-tier team on the NAQT distribution. But since most tournaments are on the MACF distribution, I think that I'm going to leave them solidly at B tier. Although, again, ICT is one of the 2 championships, so perhaps this isn't the right methodology to follow, but whatever. Chris remains a player with a ton of solid coverage and has had a fairly constant skill level across many years, and was able to contribute meaningfully to a couple of Chicago National Championships, won an ICT with Maryland back in the day. Really experienced guy. Smart guy, able to pick questions off anybody in their specialties with his experience and buzzer skills, and with, of course, a massive array of knowledge. And in terms of Clark Smith, he is a support player who's just really, really, really good at classical music, all music in general, to be honest, literature, philosophy, and can pick up assorted buzzes in other areas as well. It's just a very educated and well-rounded guy. I think this team perhaps is a bit too reliant on just those two players. I don't know too much about their supporting cast. They seem to get the rest of the other players seem to never really get much more than 15 PPG consistently, so those are the two I'm really talking about here. No offense. And I think this is what really holds them back and has held them back for a couple of years. It's just they don't have other sources of punching power to really back them up, particularly in science. If the tournament were all humanities, this team, notwithstanding Chris Ray's good biology knowledge and excellent science fraud ability, I think would be a solid A-tier team for sure. Next, I'm going to talk about Stanford. So Stanford is another team where another interesting team insofar that they have some areas where I think they're better than us or Chicago at. In this case, it's other science. Natan just knows so much about that area. I don't know if he necessarily would be better than us at math, but certainly like earth science, a lot of the applied sciences, engineering related topics he's really good at. And he's just able to, he has so many weird pockets of knowledge and just the span across the distribution that I think he's solidly a top 10 player this year, just like Taylor. And he just contributes a ton. He's a really effective team leader this year. Led his team to victory over Columbia last year. And Stanford's sort of full of those sorts of people in many ways. Bryce, I believe, is a medical student. Studied chemistry and undergrad at MIT. Has a lot of pockets of knowledge as well, but is quite good at that. Mariana is very knowledgeable about thought and has some literature pockets and modern arts, I believe, as well. And then Ethan brings in a ton of high school generalism and an absurd music specialty, as if this team really needed to be any better at music. And so just across all of that, they hit on every single area of the distribution between two players with a lot of generalism, and they have a lot of really deep pockets that, if they hit all of them each packet, they can overwhelm a lot of teams above them fairly easily. Next is Texas, and Texas is sort of the opposite insofar that, they do have a bunch of high school experience going on here, William Golden being one of the best high school players of recent vintage, Jas being one of the best high school history players of recent vintage. And these two, who have excellent coverage across lit, arts, and history between them, are joined by Ryan, who's a fairly experienced science player. He doesn't necessarily consistently get flashy buzzes across the science distribution, but has a lot of coverage there. And Brad, who's a real RMPSS specialist. Across this team, they have very comprehensive coverage. I think insofar that they have a weakness, it's that they're relying on one person to do the job most of the time for each of the categories, which is and it works out pretty well for them. Because even though I say this is a weakness, if you look at, for example, the stats that they put up on Terrapin, not a player name, let's go Jas. Probably should not have searched Sing to find that, but there's a lot of Sings out there. But yeah, if you look at them, they have pretty wide coverage, fairly balanced. And they're picking up a lot of stuff across each team, and very rarely are their players getting that many questions per packet. In terms of each of them individually, rarely gets a ton, except for William. But they have a lot of great balance, and it seems to work out well for them because they're able to get up to. I think their PP was comparable to Illinois here. Yeah. Granted, Illinois was missing Mike Etzkorn at this tournament, so I think that's a slight undercount, and that's why I think that I'd put them a bit higher than this. But you can really see that Texas has really come a long way in terms of their players' improvement. Another team I put here is Virginia. So Virginia, not exactly a well-rounded team. It's just so reliant on Itamar being so good. I would say Itamar is definitely the best regular difficulty player active right now. He beat me in a bunch of scrimmages. I didn't really help by playing poorly during those, but it's still like, my gosh, he's so freaking good. If you look, where's that Pen Bowl stats? Like, Itamar at Pen Bowl, 9 rounds doing this sort of thing. Jesus. Like Itamar can beat anybody by himself if a packet goes his way. Um, he'd have a hard time doing it against some of the S tier teams, but he could still do it. I mean, let's not forget Itamar was not nearly as good as he is now 2 years ago, and he still almost managed to win over Chicago A with a small amount of support from the Missouri team. And the Chicago A won that 2018 ACF Nationals tournament. So, gosh, like this team is so dangerous. The problem is its big weakness is the same thing. If Hitamara is an off packet, this team isn't doing so hot. Nick Collins, great literature player, great history player, but only in the areas that he's really deep on. And then they have other support. John Connor is a similar story. He's very good at some areas of history. He's very good at Christianity. But again, if the religion's not Christianity, that packet, if the history is not something he's deep on, then it's not going to necessarily go his way. So yeah, that's the thing with this team. They can beat almost anybody. They're really good. And Itamar is an absurd generalist, but no man is an island, and that's why Virginia, I think, is another epitome of B tier teams here. Like Itamar, any good packet wipes them out. But yeah. And so the last of our B tier teams will be Minnesota. So Minnesota, again, is continuing a common theme with some of these B tier teams. They have a lot of, sort of like Stanford, they have a lot of ability to just, if they hit their specialty areas consistently, they have areas where they're better than almost anybody. For example, Sean is fantastic at philosophy and social science and music, and there are niche areas of those where I think he's probably better than anybody in the country. He's also quite a good biology player, especially on ecology-related topics, and has a bunch of scattered coverage of other categories as well, such that he consistently puts up really good numbers. Similarly, Sam Bailey, not the most consistent player, but is consistently able to contribute. Besides, obviously being a fantastic economics player, he has a bunch of knowledge on things he's read. Very generally educated guy, and is able to turn that into a lot of points. And there's a lot of other players to round out this team too. Apologies, they don't all necessarily come to mind immediately, but Brian Calafavito, Tora Husar, some of the players from the team that made a run last year besides Jeffrey. There's a lot of folks they can choose among to really fill out this squad and complement Sean and Sam's huge experience. Again, this is and this is gonna produce results. They have a lot of coverage, and adding somebody with a lot of high school experience like Tora, for example, could probably make up for the fact that Sean and Sam don't really have that core high school knowledge down. But this team, it can beat almost anyone. We've seen them do it before. We saw them have a fantastic run with Jeffrey's support last year. Even without Jeffrey, there's still so much upside potential from Sean and Sam that this team is solidly still right here in the B tier. So that brings us to our last 4 teams. I was just talking about Jeffrey, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about Cornell. So among our C tier teams, fitting that we start with Cornell. Cornell is interesting because they're absurdly good at 2 categories, history and science. They're the best science team in the country because of Jeffrey. I don't think that's controversial. Perhaps more controversial is I say we're probably second behind them, but again, it could be disputed. Jonathan Tran is an amazing history player. I'd say he's probably one of the four best or so. He's one of the few players I truly fear on history questions. But yeah, the rest of the areas. I mean, Daniel Shu has some good arts coverage, um, but they're lacking in literature. They're lacking in aside from areas that Jeff knows decently. They're a bit lacking in philosophy and social science. They could really use a lot more coverage there, and yeah, that's what holds them back. They're between their two deep specialties, you can't hit those every single time, and even when you do, that's 8 questions. You have to make up the rest somehow. And so they can do that. They have enough knowledge of various areas to do that, but I think that this leaves them solidly at C tier. Particularly, I think they'll benefit if their opponents misplay those other categories substantially. So also here I'll put Columbia B. This is a bit of a newcomer to this, but I think Columbia B had a real coming out party at the SCTs and regionals this year. If you look at this, I mean Gareth is a fantastic NAQT player, and they as a team they pulled off a win over Maryland here. They did a great job. They came in second at SCT. They came in second at regionals as well. Granted, that's because Maryland wasn't around to play off a second place tie. But yeah, they had a great regionals performance led by Gerhardt. Again, Gerhardt has improved so much this year. It's incredible. He's always been a player with a sort of random knowledge base, a lot of things he goes off of Wikipedia, but he's expanded it with a far bigger repertoire of Quizbowl knowledge this year, in addition to an ever-expanding real knowledge base of a bunch of deep Gerhardt topics. He's extremely good at religion and mythology. He's very good at very specific areas of science like elements and animals. He's a math PhD, so he's a great math player. He'll pick up a lot of random buzzes across the science distribution, and he's got a lot of interest in visual arts as well. And finally, he can get random buzzes on books he's read or a few of social history topics that he finds very interesting. And but talking about Gerhardt only is doing the rest of them a disservice. I mean, Julia still brings up a lot. Who's going to be our club president next year, or vice president currently, still has a ton of lit knowledge from high school, and is able to still deliver on that in a lot of games. She got 3 lit questions off of us at regionals when they went late and the packet didn't go our way. So make of that what you will. She's also quite good at mythology. Gareth knows a lot of history and geography content and can occasionally get some other things, but he's really solid there. And then on the 4th player on that team varies depending on the tournament. There are a ton of potential different candidates, but usually Daniel Shao, our club president, is the usual 4th player on that team. And he also adds a lot of history. He's a good music player. He knows a lot of philosophy from his major. He knows everything about Germany. Just an all-around excellent 4th player to round that team out effectively. And you never know when he's going to get a random buzz out of his really broad knowledge base. So the other 2 teams that's why Columbia B is in the C tier here. I think they have beaten teams above them. A Gerhardt performance of a very good Gerhardt performance, like the Columbia B cross Yale B team beat Chicago B at Terrapin. That's the sort of thing that I don't think is that surprising. They have a lot of upward spike potential, but just like Cornell, I don't know if they'll be able to consistently deliver that against enough teams in the top bracket to really, really come out with a high placing. And the same is sort of true with Oxford and Cambridge, and I'm putting them in at the same time because, well, I don't know a ton about these teams, and I wish I could invite the British folks on to talk a bit more about them. But, the Brits, from playing against them a decent amount and talking to them a lot and seeing them play Age of Empires and stuff, they have a ton of real deep pockets of knowledge. If you look on the wiki quiz community, you see a ton of them writing those on their really deep specialty areas, and you have players like that all around Britain. And Oxford and Cambridge are the traditional powerhouses, along with Southampton these days, I suppose, led by Evan Lynch, because they're the places whose players have enough experience with the canon, and that they're able to not just have these niche knowledge bases, but also consistently deliver on the wider, well-known area of Quizbowl things. And not knowing the players well enough individually, I find it difficult to comment on them. The only two I have a decent amount of knowledge about are, I guess, Joseph Kroll, who is at Cambridge. He's good science, to my understanding, he's a good science and arts player. Also knows a bunch about modern literature, and he's a solid generalist overall in Oxford. And I talked to Ollie from Oxford a lot, and Ollie's a ridiculous classics player. Who also has a bunch of general history knowledge and is a well-educated Brit, so you can get a bunch of other buzzes. But I think these teams, they function collectively, sort of. I think they're not they're not the same type of team as Columbia beat, but they sort of function similarly, I guess. If you know what I mean. Like they hit their stuff and they will go boom, but they're very reliant on that to pull off a good performance against another team. Because otherwise, I think their overall canon knowledge and middle buzz potential on really hard tournaments is like ACF Nationals is not really there to really consistently be beating, say, the A tier teams or the S tier teams. They can certainly do. I would not be surprised to see any of these folks beat a B tier team, but yeah, those are my thoughts. Well, anyways, that went pretty long, probably longer than would have been ideal, and this is definitely a bit of a podcast format, sort of rambling thoughts. But I hope some of you found this interesting, and again, I really wish I could have been playing Nationals this past month. I unfortunately was not able to, but I really, really hope that ACF and/or NEQT find a way to make it happen, because you can see there's a lot of amazing players to talk about, a lot of amazing teams. The top of the field is really strong this year. Like all of these teams right here, I think are anywhere between like 16 to 18 PPB teams at the Nationals, and that's a very impressive amount of depth in the field. And the two top teams this year, I think, are not to downplay the strength of last year's teams, but I think the two top teams this year are better than the top teams were in 2018 or 2019. I don't think it's hard to rank assess vis-a-vis 2017, 16, 15, but I think this is something I really want to see happen, and it means a lot to me. And the field is so strong. It's amazing seeing all these people display their knowledge in tournaments, and yeah, makes me kind of sad, but oh well. I love this game, and I love talking about it, and so I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about this as well. Thank you so much, and stay safe, everybody, and I hope to see you all playing Quizbowl tournaments again soon. Bye-bye.